Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the source material you send us, could be articles, research, even personal notes, and we really plunge right in. We pull out the most interesting ideas, the surprising bits, the things that make you think. The goal, cut through the noise, leave you feeling genuinely clued in. And today, wow, you've handed us something. Well, it's really out there. It's all about this German philosopher, Teufelsdröckh, and his apparently baffling philosophy of clothes. Definitely not your average topic.
No, definitely not. And the source itself is fascinating, isn't it? It's set up as this editor figure trying desperately to make sense of Professor Teufelsdröck's writings, which are apparently vast, chaotic, often pretty hard to penetrate. And the editor's also trying to piece together his life story, which is just as obscure. It feels almost like reading a detective novel about philosophy.
Exactly. So that's our mission today. Navigate this sea of thought, as the editor calls it. We need to figure out the core of Teufelsdröck's ideas. And trust us, they go way beyond just shirts and trousers. We want to understand what he's saying about society, life itself, and maybe get a sense of the strange man behind it all. Prepare for some unconventional perspectives.
Right. And the really audacious idea right from the start is this claim that by studying something as seemingly mundane as clothes, you can unlock fundamental truths about the universe, about man. It sounds kind of absurd on the face of it, but Teufelsdröckh is dead serious. So to even start unpacking the philosophy, I think we need to get a feel for the professor himself.
Okay, so what were those first impressions? What did the editor make of this Teufelsdröckh guy?
Well, the editor describes him as incredibly quiet, very self-contained, someone totally devoted to what he calls high philosophies. But it wasn't a gentle sort of quietness, apparently. Underneath, there were these flashes of really sharp, cutting insight. The editor points out this contradiction, moments that suggest this deep, ethereal love or infinite pity right alongside this almost, saturnine indifference to everyday worries like status or money.
And his official job title sounds almost like a joke.
It really does. Professor der allerlei Wissenschaft, which apparently means professor of things in general.
How about that?
He holds this title at the University of Weissnicht too, which means know not where. And the text makes a point of this really bizarre detail. He was appointed, got the title, but never got any funding, never actually gave any lectures. So essentially just a nameplate. Very Teufelsdröckh, it seems.
His living space sounds pretty symbolic too.
Yeah, described as a watchtower apartment, way up high above the city. And he gives this really striking image, looking down on everyone else below, calls them salted fish in their barrel or like vipers tangled up, while he sits up there alone with the stars. It just perfectly captures that mix of, high perspective and deep detachment.
But what about, practicalities? Did anyone actually interact with him day to day?
Only his housekeeper, a woman named Lieschen. The text has this great detail about her cleanings being like earthquakes that disrupt his philosophizing. He apparently dreaded them. She was essential, handling the real-world stuff.
It's a nice contrast, isn't it? The guy with his head in the stars, still needing someone to sweep the floor.
And the editor is just constantly battling the sheer messiness of Teufelsdröck's work. Boundless, almost formless contents, he says, calls it a sea of thought. Which, honestly, is kind of what we're trying to chart right now.
Exactly. So let's dive into that sea. What is this philosophy of clothes at its heart? Well, he actually proposes writing something called the spirit of clothes, and he specifically links it to Montesquieu's famous spirit of laws. What's the connection he's making there?
He's arguing that fashion, clothing customs, they aren't just random. They're not superficial whims. Like laws, they're guided by these deep, often unconscious, mysterious operations of the mind. So fashion isn't just about looking good. It's expressing something fundamental about human nature, about society.
And this connects to one of his most quoted lines, maybe his core definition of humanity.
Ah, yes. Man is a tool-using animal. He thinks that might be the precisest and best way to define us. And the insight there is pretty radical in its simplicity. He's saying our defining characteristic isn't just thinking or feeling, but this built-in drive to use tools, to shape our world, extend our abilities.
And clothes are one of the first examples of these tools, or a primary one.
Precisely. And that immediately lifts clothing way beyond just covering up. It becomes a fundamental technology, a way humans interact with their environment, shape it, create meaning within it. Suddenly, studying clothes is essential to understanding, civilization itself.
The text gives some pretty wild examples from history to back this up, like medieval fashion.
Oh, absolutely. These descriptions of gowns scalloped out behind and before, or train gowns so long 4 or 5 Ls, they needed boys just to carry them, and those enormous starched ruffs. 20 inches broad. He uses these extreme examples to show how clothing has always been complex, symbolic, sometimes incredibly cumbersome. And then there's that amazing, almost slapstick anecdote about the courtier getting his fancy outfit caught on a nail.
Right, and being reduced to a spindle, coughing up dust.
Exactly. It grounds the high philosophy in this very vivid, slightly absurd reality. It shows the actual power and also the fragility that clothes can give.
Okay, so that's the literal side. But then he takes this idea much deeper, metaphorically.
Yes, this is where it gets really fascinating. He basically expands the definition of clothes to include everything that wraps around our essential selves. Customs, social structures, job titles, ranks, even our physical bodies. These are all layers, integuments, he calls them.
And he uses that incredibly striking thought experiment, imagining powerful people stripped naked.
The naked Duke of Windlestraw dressing a naked House of Lords. Yeah, he really makes you picture it, doesn't he?
And the conclusion he draws from that visualization is, well, it's pretty sharp.
It really is. He argues that if you take away the mystic qualities, the omnipotent virtue of clothes, and he means the symbolic power of rank, uniform, title, not just the fabric, then everything collapses. Government, law, property, police, civilized society, it all dissolves. And the real terror, he says, isn't just being naked, it's hearing the voice of your own shame. The power of these social clothes relies on our collective agreement to believe in them and our own internal fear of seeing them removed.
He really doesn't pull any punches, does he? Seeing institutions as just cloth rags and empty masks, and that incredibly cynical line about society's true master organ.
Declaring it's a purse.
Yeah.
That beneath all the ceremony and titles, the real driver is money. It's a stark view. Maybe timelessly relevant, you could argue.
But the editor, even finding this cynical, seems unable to actually hate Teufelsdröckh. Why is that?
Well, because scattered throughout all this biting critique, you get these sudden, almost dazzling moments of Platonic mysticism, these points where Teufelsdröckh seems to glimpse something deeper, a spiritual reality underneath it all. A sea of light and love, as the editor puts it. It makes the editor suspect Teufelsdröckh isn't just being cynical for its own sake. Maybe he sees the superficialities so clearly because he's searching for something truly profound.
So this whole philosophy is obviously deeply tied to the man himself. And the text does try to give us his life story, using material from someone called Hofrath Heustrecke. But it's notoriously tricky, right? Vague, no dates.
It really is. We get glimpses of his childhood, adopted in this village, and enter his early sensitivity to nature, learning from the old men under the linden tree. And these surprisingly deep childhood thoughts, like realizing by the stream that any road will lead you to the end of the world, or the idea that the ring of necessity you're born with should become a ring of duty. Hints of a very introspective kid.
His school days sound less inspiring.
Oh, far from it. He talks about being taught by hidebound pedants, just cramming dead vocables, basically useless facts into kids' heads. His critique is quite sharp. He sees the school system as a mini version, an epitome of the wider world's flaws and rigidities.
And university didn't impress him much either.
No, he found it chaotic, superficial, calls the students auscultators, just focused on coming preferment, getting ahead in their careers. It really highlights the contrast with his own intense inner life. He apparently protected himself with this outward stillness and an ironic tone, calls it a buckram case, like a stiff outer covering. We also hear about a very brief, failed friendship with an Englishman, Herr Teufelsdröckh, suggests he found connection difficult.
And all this background seems to lead towards a major personal crisis.
Yeah.
Centered around what the text calls his romance.
Ah, yes, Blumina. He talks about her in almost heavenly terms, sees her as this divine presence. Their meeting at some noble mansion is described like time stopped, like he was seeing the infinite in the finite through love. Very intense.
Which must have made the heartbreak absolutely devastating.
Completely. Just those simple words from Blumine. They were to meet no more. He calls it a crash of doom. Felt like he was falling into an abyss.
Yeah, this sends him into a period of intense suffering, wandering around.
Yes. He tries to find healing in nature, but gets no peace. Realizes he can't escape his own shadow. The pain is internal.
Which builds up to this famous section, the everlasting no.
Right. This is the absolute bottom. He feels totally abandoned, fatherless, outcast. The universe seems evil, belonging to the devil. He loses his faith completely. Total nihilistic despair. But crucially, it's also the turning point. From this rock bottom, he finds this incredible defiance, describes his whole me standing up in native, God-created majesty to protest against it all. He realizes his own inner freedom, calls it his Baphometic baptism, like a self-created ritual of choosing his own meaning. The text even calls this the most important transaction in life, and after this lowest point, he passes through what he terms the center of indifference.
Okay, what's that? The center of indifference.
It seems to be a state of transition. The acute pain of the everlasting no is gone, but positive meaning hasn't rushed back in yet. It's like a philosophical pause button. Emotional neutrality, a kind of blank slate after the storm where something new can start to grow.
And that new growth leads towards the everlasting yea.
Exactly. The beginning of the recovery, the upward swing. The text talks about this shift happening after the hot Parmesan wind of denial finally passes. He's back in his skyey tent, looking down at the world, but now filled with this deep sense of pity for all the suffering.
And what's the key realization that pulls him out of it?
It's this incredibly powerful idea. There is in man a higher than love of happiness. He can do without happiness, and instead thereof find blessedness. So he's rejecting the whole idea that life is about seeking personal pleasure or comfort. Real fulfillment, true blessedness comes from something else entirely.
And he links this back to a sort of enduring spiritual core.
Precisely. Even if old temples crumble down, even if traditional religions fade, that basic human need for meaning, for connection to something bigger, it's still there. The altar's still there, and its sacred lamp perennially burning. The form might change, but the need remains.
And this new perspective gives him a real sense of purpose, a call to action.
A very strong one. It's the command. Produce. Produce. Were it but the pitifulest infinitesimal fraction of a product, produce it, in God's name. Work while it is called today, for the night cometh. The radical insight here is that purpose isn't found by waiting for happiness, but in the act of doing, of creating, contributing, no matter how small. It's a direct answer to despair. Incredibly relevant, I think.
So after going through all that personal transformation, how does he look at society differently?
He sees societal change almost like a natural cycle of destruction and rebirth. He uses the image of the phoenix. Old Sahamedi burns away, and there's the hope a new one might rise from the ashes, but no guarantee, and it might take centuries.
He talks a lot about symbols in society. What are those, and what's happening to them in his view?
Symbols are all those things we collectively agree have meaning. Titles, rituals, flags, institutions, fashion styles. He says the old ones are decaying, becoming like worn-out rags. People don't truly believe in their power anymore, so they're just dropping off. He gives that great example of the English champion at the coronation.
The guy who needed help getting on his horse.
Exactly. Supposed to be this bold challenger, but he can barely mount up. A perfect image of a superannuated symbol. A form that's lost its real meaning and vitality.
But he does see something fundamental that societies always need.
Yes, this basic human impulse for hero worship. He thinks it's innate, perpetual, a cornerstone for any kind of stable society. Even if old heroes fade, the need to look up to someone who embodies ideals will always be there.
And he spots new things emerging, new organic filaments taking over some of those old roles.
Right. New forms growing within the old decaying structure. He points to things like newspapers becoming the new pulpits, shaping public thought, and literature acting as a kind of new church or liturgy, providing stories, values, moral guidance, especially as traditional religion wanes.
Okay, now let's get into maybe the most mind-bending concept. Natural supernaturalism. What on earth is he getting at here?
This is where the text really presents him as a seer. The core idea is that the world we experience as normal, solid reality. It's actually more like a painted pasteboard theater, an air image. It's not that it isn't real, but that our perception of it is incredibly limited, filtered. We only see the surface effects.
In space and time are somehow part of this illusion.
He calls them wonder-hiding stupefactions. They are the very things, the mental constructs that limit our perception and make the universe seem ordinary. He uses this analogy. Imagine if we had wishing hats that could instantly transport us anywhere in space or time. The world would immediately seem filled with miracles, wouldn't it? The past would be right here, distant places right next door. It's only because we're bound by space and time that we don't see this constant miraculousness.
The conclusion he draws from this is pretty staggering.
It is, he says. We are spirits that are shaped into a body, and that fade away again into air and invisibility. Our life is this brief journey through mystery to mystery, from God and to God. The implication is that our true nature isn't this limited physical form, but something eternal, spiritual, just temporarily clothed in flesh and circumstance.
And he ties this back to nature itself.
Nature is the time vesture of God, he says. It's like the clothing God wears within the dimension of time. For the wise, it reveals the divine. For the foolish, it just hides it. It's really a call to look at reality more deeply, not just glance through it, to perceive the underlying wonder.
Okay, brace yourself, because now we hit possibly the strangest section of all. Teufelsdröckh identifies these two major sects in British society at the time.
The dandies and the poor slaves. Yes, it's a truly bizarre classification. He describes dandyism almost like a strange religion. Their holy books are fashionable novels. Their rituals involve these very specific, odd, canonical statutes about dress, white waistcoats, tight trousers. The editor admits he just cannot figure them out.
And then the complete opposite, the poor slaves.
Who he identifies mainly as Irish immigrants. He sees them as almost worshipping the earth, Hertha, because they're always digging, doing manual labor. Poitín, Irish whiskey, is apparently essential for their religious solemnities, and the source gives this really raw, gritty description from a late John Bernard.
Yeah, of the family meal. No meat, no beer, just milk and salt eaten from holes in the table. Very stark physical descriptions, too.
It's an incredibly stark contrast to the dandies, almost like two different species inhabiting the same island.
And Teufelsdröckh makes this wild prediction about these two groups.
He sees them as representing the fundamental conflict in England, money and hunger. He basically predicts this massive chaotic clash between them, like two world batteries charged up and about to discharge violently.
Yeah.
Based entirely on this extreme class divide symbolized by their different clothes and ways of life.
And then the absolute weirdest twist in this whole section, his final thought about tailors.
Oh boy, yes. He argues, quite seriously it seems, that tailors aren't just craftsmen. They're something like a creator or divinity. He even mentions Jonathan Swift, hinting at this idea before him. Teufelsdröck's argument is that the tailor takes raw, unholy materials, cloth, thread, and through their skill they lend power. They make things holy. He uses the image of an Edinburgh sign for a breeches maker. This humble tailor has the power to completely transform how someone looks, how they're perceived, their social standing. It's bizarre, but kind of a powerful point about the transformative magic of appearance and craft.
Wow, okay. So after navigating all that, how does the poor editor sum up his feelings about Teufelsdröckh and this whole project?
Well, he expresses this very relatable mix of astonishment, gratitude, and disapproval. He's clearly been deeply affected, intellectually stimulated, maybe even changed by the work. But he's also really frustrated by how difficult it is, how obscure Teufelsdröckh can be sometimes. He acknowledges the massive impact, but also the sheer effort involved.
And what's the final piece of the biography? How does Teufelsdröck's story end, as far as we know?
It ends with him vanishing. The last detail we get is this account of him hearing the news about the revolution in Paris, the 3 days. He apparently says, "is get on," which means it is beginning, and then just disappears from Bleisnick too. Poof, gone, leaving the editor and us with one final enigma. And so, yeah, that brings us to the end of our dive. We've really covered some ground, haven't we? From literal clothes to metaphorical ones covering society and self, through the absolute depths of despair in the everlasting no up to the call for action in the everlasting yea. We've looked at reality as maybe less solid than it seems and considered the strange sects of dandies and poor slaves and even the divine power of tailors. Quite a ride.
It really is. Encountering Teufelsdröckh, even through the editor's filter, it definitely forces you to look again. At the world, at society, at yourself, even just at the clothes you put on this morning. It makes you question that solid-seeming reality, search for meaning in unexpected places. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that even something mundane can be a key to understanding much bigger things. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Teufelsdröck's philosophy of clothes. That was certainly something.
It absolutely was. Maybe, as you go about your day, just notice the clothes around you, not just fabrics, but the uniforms, the logos, the titles, the customs. What do they really signify? Which symbols feel a bit worn out now? And can you spot any new organic filaments emerging? Just a thought.
And always remember, these insights came directly from the source material you provided for us to explore.
We really look forward to the next deep dive, wherever your sources might take us next time.
Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and please do keep sharing your sources with us for future deep dives.